Sanjay, NY CEO. So glad to be here with everyone today. I thought I might start out by talking about the biggest example of an EOT in the world. The employee ownership trust structure for employee ownership is the mainstream way of doing employee ownership in the U.S., and the John Lewis Partnership, in combination with Waitrose Supermarkets, has been owned by an EOT in full since 1950. It's one of the oldest employee-owned companies in the world. It has, I think, about 85,000 employees. The John Lewis Partnership side is kind of like a Macy's. It's a really upscale department store, and then they have a supermarket division as well. Here is the annual end-of-year meeting where they announce profit shares as a percentage of every employee's salary. So that all the happy people there are getting a 17% bonus at the end of the year. Different year, different number, 11% in that year. So EOTs are common, quite practical approach to employee ownership. It's just the common practical approach to employee ownership in the UK, not so much in the US, although it does have some historical precedent in the US. Uh, you can see here 13.3 billion in 2018 revenue, US dollars, 83,000 employees currently. So what we're here to talk about today is how to use what an employee ownership trust is, and how the EOT structure might be used in the U.S. And it is being used in the U.S. About a dozen companies or so now use the EOT structure in the U.S. Under U.S. law. And so let's get into it. An EOT is a trust that holds some or all of the shares of a company on behalf of most or all of the employees of the company. Just like an ESOP, and I'm just going to assume a kind of a baseline familiarity with the ESOP here. And if there are questions relating to the ESOP, please do feel free to insert them in the questions box on your screen. Just like an ESOP, with an EOT, the employees get the kind of the profits or financial gains from the company. They get the benefits of having a corporate governance structure that is directed to the benefit of the employees. And just like an ESOP company, you get a great kind of ownership culture. So you get all the same stuff you get at a high level, that you get through the ESOP with respect to employee ownership. You get the profits, you get kind of the voting of the company at the highest level of the company is directed to the benefit of the employees, and you get the benefits of the culture. So you get the profits, the voting, and the culture of employee ownership that you do with an ESOP. But the EOT has some differences, and all of the differences that I'm about to get into here all flow from a single primary high-level difference, and that is the fact that an EOT does not feature individual employee share accounts. In an ESOP, it's a trust. Also, an ESOP is also a trust, but all of the shares are divided up into little accounts for each employee. So you have an Excel sheet, everybody's name, and it says how many shares each employee owns inside of the ESOP trust. With an EOT, all of the shares are just simply held as a group for all of the employees. And so all of the differences flow from that little fact. First and foremost, an EOT is not a retirement plan. So you're not putting shares into an employee's account and then buying back those shares at their exit. So it doesn't function as a retirement plan. Rather, the financial benefits flow in the form of improved wages, benefits, end-of-year profits. But also, because an EOT is not a retirement plan, it's not regulated by ERISA. So for those of you familiar with the ESOP, you are also aware of the kind of challenges that come with, there are benefits, but also challenges that come with regulation under ERISA. Namely the possibility of a lawsuit, Department of Labor oversight. Another big difference that flows from the fact that you don't have individual employee share accounts is that EOTs can be structured to be perpetual. So with an ESOP, the company is constantly repurchasing these shares from employees and then recycling those shares to new employees. Um, there is also there's a set of fiduciary duties that are put upon the ESOP trustees under ERISA that if a sufficiently high offer comes along, the ESOP trustees might have to sell the company to a third party buyer, even if the employees don't necessarily even want that buyout to happen. With an EOT, because you don't have that ERISA oversight, you can put in any rules into the EOT trust that you want as to when and how a sale should ever occur in the future. The other way to say that is that with an EOT, you can get um, be pretty darn specific about whether or not and you want the EOT company to be perpetually employee owned. This is another really big difference and advantage for the EOT. And I put perpetual here in quotes because nothing is nothing's truly forever. I mean, companies don't last forever, and who knows what the future holds. But you can get pretty sure that with an EOT, that as long as this company is around, still has, is still profitable, that you can maintain the employee ownership. Um, you're not repurchasing shares from employees upon exit. So you don't need the annual evaluations that you need to have under an ESOP, right? So you're going to need evaluation at the beginning of it, at the time of the initial transfer when you're moving the shares into the EOT, and that's for tax purposes. That's not for ERISA or for Department of Labor. That's just for the IRS and for your own, for your own books. Um, After that initial evaluation for that transfer, you don't need to have the cost, expense, burden of getting the company valued every single year. Um, Flows from all of this goes without saying now. There aren't the annual repurchase obligations. You don't have to do the kind of very complicated forecasting that is involved in setting up and maintaining an ESOP. Um, you don't have to be sure that there's some cushion of cash sitting on the books of the company for 10 years out, 20 years out, and predict how many employees are expected to exit in X year and what the value of the company will be in that year. Once the shares go into the trust, they stay in, and you can make a profit share or increase wages or improve benefits at the company when the cash is available to do so. But you don't have to have the cash on hand for repurchase obligations. I think also very significant. Um, it's often a big challenge for ESOP companies to include the second generation of employees at an equitable level in the ESOP. So, there are ways that you can improve upon including, second generation employees or third generations in the ESOP. But fundamentally, um, the group of employees that are going to benefit from the ESOP are the employees that are around at the time of the transfer for the first 10 years. Maybe you do an inside loan and you stretch that out to 20 or 30 years or something like that. But fundamentally, it's the group of employees that are around near to the time of the transfer and the buyout of the company by the ESOP that are accruing shares into their account. Once those shares are go to those flow to those employees' accounts, future employees, it's really hard for companies to give shares to those future employees because then you're diluting the value of the employee owners who are around at the time of the sale. If you catch me on that. With an EOT, you don't have that problem at all. You can kind of create a formula in the EOT trust as to how financial benefits are going to flow to employees, and that's it. You don't have to struggle to rebalance ESOP. I mean, for those of you who are familiar with the ESOP, there's all sorts of, sort of tricks and tools that are used just to kind of make plans equitable between generations of employees. Inside loans, there's rebalancing ESOP accounts. There's the idea that you would terminate one ESOP and install a new ESOP. Think about the expense of that. There's also the suggestion that when you get to a certain point in the haves and have-nots problem, the best thing to do might simply be to sell the ESOP out and just sell to a third. I've heard that suggested in a webinar on this topic of the haves and have-nots problem. So with an EOT, you just get rid of that problem entirely. EOT owns all the shares for all the employees, and there's a sort of a rule that's used to apply to all employees, you know, current and future, all current employees, whoever they may be at any time in the future, as to how financial benefits flow. If there are 3 points that I would hope that you would walk away from today's webinar uh, with respect to the difference between an EOT and an ESOP, one is that once the shares go in, I mean, this is sort of different ways of saying the same thing in a way, but once the shares go in, they stay in. You don't have individual employee share accounts. All of the shares, or some, if it's not 100% EOT, whatever, that portion of the shares that is held by the EOT is held on behalf of all of the employees covered under the EOT. And the way the British say this is the British say that employees are naked in, naked out, kind of like a law partnership functions these days. You don't buy into the law partnership these days. You become a partner. You get the benefits of being a partner while you're with the firm, and when you leave, you're not getting a buyout when you leave. You got the benefits of being a partner while you were at the firm. Same thing here with an EOT. You're not buying your shares, you're not buying into your partnership or your ownership of the firm, and you're also not getting bought out when you leave. You're naked in, naked out. So this is a point in this presentation where I like to back way up and just let everybody know that I love ESOPs. I'm a huge supporter of the ESOP. ESOPs are the best thing that's happened to employee ownership in the history of employee ownership. I just finished a 300 plus page PhD dissertation. Um, uh, uh, I'm an employee ownership nerd, so I got a law degree and a PhD studying employee ownership, and I just finished a PhD uh, sort of demonstrating that ESOPs are the best thing, since sliced bread when it comes to employee ownership. So I'm a huge fan of the ESOP. Okay, so go ESOPs, and if you want to do an ESOP, and if your analysis leads you to wanting to do an ESOP, I'd love to help you do the ESOP. And in fact, that's what I'm sort of holding myself out here today in a way, or educating you guys about, is that there's another possibility you should consider. You should consider an ESOP, but you should also consider an EOT as an employee ownership alternative. I'd love to help you figure out what would be best for you. And again, I'd be happy to help you with an EOT. Also be happy to help you with an ESOP. For those of you who aren't familiar with ESOPs, just a quick note. ESOPs have huge tax benefits. Although there is precedent for the EOT in the U.S., it's relatively minimal compared to the precedent for an ESOP. An ESOP is the mainstream form of employee ownership in the U.S. And you have a very large community of service providers around ESOPs. With an employee ownership trust, the community of service providers isn't really a distinct community yet. I mean, you might go to a trusts and estates lawyer more so than you would, or a family trust lawyer more so than you would an employee benefits or ERISA attorney. A side-by-side comparison. We've already gone through this, but a little bit, but just to put it all together here. An ESOP gets all the tax benefits. An EOT doesn't have any tax benefits at all. There's some legislation pending in Maryland and in Wisconsin around tax benefits for an EOT, but presently EOT gets no tax benefits. That might not be a problem if you're planning on zeroing out your books at the end of the year anyway, and in that case, it doesn't really matter so much that the EOT doesn't have a tax benefit. But to the extent that you're a very profitable company and you are keeping that profit on the books, if you're 100% S-Corp ESOP, then you don't have to pay taxes on that. We mentioned lots of precedent. With ownership culture, you get that under either structure. With corporate governance being directed to the benefit of employees, you get that under either structure. An ESOP is a formal retirement plan under ERISA. But with an EOT, you can create a regular diversified 401k plan for the employees and make contributions to that 401k plan. So you can create really healthy retirement savings for employees using an EOT structure. It's just that you would use a diversified 401k plan as opposed to the securities of the employer. Um, I think this is an important point to make because um, it, if you look at the statistics, I don't know that there's a clear case in one direction or another that an ESOP gets significantly higher rates of return than diversified 401k plans. And any economist would probably, or every mainstream economist would say that your money is safer in a diversified plan than in a single company. And the big difference between workers who have ESOP accounts and workers who have 401k accounts is that um, it's usually a smaller class or employees that gets 401k plans, and in ESOP companies, everybody gets an ESOP plan, not just the executive class of workers, the executive group of workers. So if you create a diversified 401k plan that covers all of the employees of the company, and you make contributions at the same levels um, in those 401k plans as you would for the average ESOP employee, then you should get roughly about the same outcomes in terms of retirement savings for employee owners using an EOT as you would an ESOP. Getting into the weeds on that issue a little bit because it's an issue that concerns ESOP practitioners, and it's important to me too. Um, of course, with an EOT, you get the benefits as well of current profit sharing, which in many cases for a certain class of workers is more important to have money in the bank today to pay the rent today and get the Christmas presents under the tree this year rather than a far off retirement benefit, or to use money, for example, to go back to school. That's not to say you can't do profit sharing under an ESOP. There are rules that specifically support and aid companies in doing current profit sharing in ESOP, but it's pretty universally the case that ESOP companies don't do much in the way of current profit sharing. That's what I always hear from ESOP practitioner friends. EOT, you get the benefits of perpetuity, which we discussed, um, and so now something that we haven't discussed so much. I mean, an EOT is just so much simpler. It's simpler for the seller. It's simpler for the employees to understand, and those are big sort of uh, 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 boxes to check. I've heard one company owner say to me that whenever he sort of says that he's interested in doing an ESOP, he kind of raises his hand and says, "Yeah, I'm thinking about doing an ESOP." All of a sudden, he has 20 people around him, in his word, and these are his words, trying to walk him through the 101 Fred Astaire dance steps that you have to get through to get to an ESOP installation. With an EOT, it is radically simpler. You're setting up a fairly simple trust. You're transferring your shares to the trust, and that's it. You don't have to do fancy forecasting. You don't have to make really complex decisions about allocation of shares in a way that fits the requirements of ERISA. It's pretty straightforward actually, and because of that, we'll get to this in a moment, but it's much cheaper. It's also much simpler for employees. This is actually a really big challenge for ESOP companies. Again, I'm a big proponent of the ESOP. It's just that if you're a proponent of the ESOP, you're also sort of required to say that when you install an ESOP, it's really, really important that you do education, ownership culture training around the ESOP and what that means, because for a lot of employees, getting an ESOP balance statement at the end of the year doesn't mean much. And I hear friends who are, veteran ESOP practitioners say that an ESOP doesn't really mean much. Even when you do the ownership culture and you do the training, even then, the ESOP doesn't really mean very much to the average employee owner until they see that first generation of employees retire and get that check, get that cash out of the ESOP. Then it starts to mean something. So with an EOT, getting that current profit sharing, there's that immediate feedback loop. And so I think that for employees, it's much easier to understand what the benefits of an EOT are, because in that very first year, you're going to be getting some cash out. all of this then circles back around to a difference. It's much simpler to install an EOT, a lot less regulation. It's also a lot less costly. With an ESOP, you're talking $150,000 to install an ESOP. There's about $30,000 a year ongoing costs. That's for the valuation. That's for the ERISA trustee. That's for the third party administrator for a pension plan. For an EOT, you're talking about maybe $30,000 to install. You're setting up a trust, you're doing a transfer, um, probably doing a seller note, and you have a trustee, and you have a sort of and you have a valuation done. That's 30K. Maybe with the trustee, outside trustee evaluation, maybe that goes up to 40K. Ongoing costs, if you have an you're not doing an annual valuation, you don't need a third party administrator. If you have an outside trustee, maybe you're talking 5K a year. So 150K plus 30K ongoing in the ESOP, 30, 40K plus 5K ongoing for the EOT. Again, no repurchase obligations for the EOT and no regulation under ERISA. If the CCorp, so for those of you who know that with the ESOP, if you do a CCorp ESOP, you get a capital gains tax deferral. As long as you sell at least 30% to the ESOP, you get a capital gains tax deferral on the sale proceeds. If that's what's really the most important thing to you, then I'm going to advise you to do an ESOP. If you're looking to the S Corp ESOP structure and you're going to pass on the 1042 capital gains tax deferral. You're going to pass on the C Corp ESOP structure. If what you're really interested in is the S Corp ESOP structure and the company not having any taxes moving forward, then I'd strongly urge you to consider the EOT. Because what happens is it's really nice in those first 10 years to not have to pay any taxes, right? And that's certainly extremely helpful in paying you back as the seller. But if what you're interested in is not just getting paid back on as quick a time frame as possible, but sort of the benefit of that tax benefit moving forward for the company, then just consider that, once you hit that 15-year, 20-year wall, and you hit those repurchase obligations, they start coming in hard. You have to think about what's really going to be better for the company moving forward. Is it better to have this sort of very complicated forecasting requirement on the company where they have to sort of guess within some limited range how much cash they're going to owe on the repurchase obligations every year moving forward, and all that cash coming out of the company, in some cases preventing reinvestment for R&D purposes or reinvestment for growth because they have the obligations. They have to cash out the employees. So even if they get the tax benefit, they have to pay out all of that cash. They might not have the cash they need or want to have to do other things with. With an EOT, yeah, you have to pay taxes, but you can zero out your books every year and not pay any taxes because you zeroed out your books. You can pay benefits to the employees in good years. You cannot pay out benefits in bad years when you need to tighten your belt. And if there are really great ideas for growth or for R&D that would benefit everybody, well, you can retain the cash to do that. And these days, you're only getting taxed at this new lower corporate tax rate. It's better than for corporations. It's a better tax rate. So might not be that bad even. So all things to consider when it comes to making a decision between the S Corp ESOP structure and the EOT. Again, if you're looking for the C Corp ESOP 1042 deferral, then ESOP is probably going to be the approach for you. So what kinds of companies might explore an EOT? If you're here and you're just exploring your options of how to transition to employee ownership, then I hope I just made the case to you just now that you should think about doing an EOT. And again, I'd love to help you think about whether or not an ESOP or an EOT is best for you. Interestingly enough, I've probably gotten more calls and had more conversations over the last few years with ESOP companies interested in leaving their ESOP, but they want to keep their employee ownership and transitioning to an EOT. Why? There's a lot of reasons that companies tell me. One is they don't like this. They don't like the haves and have-nots problem with the ESOP. They constantly have to rebalance the accounts, and it just gets very complicated, and it's not fair to the new employees. That's one reason. Another reason is that it's the repurchase obligations. They don't like that the company is like a snake eating its own tail. It constantly has to repurchase itself, and they just kind of want to get out of that cycle and just have the company owned by the employees under employee ownership and just be done with it. A third reason is um, that, and this is maybe a little more peculiar of a reason, but um, those ERISA trustee duties do at times kind of flow. They're operating at the level of the ESOP trustee as a shareholder, but those duties, those concerns do inevitably kind of flow down in some way or another. Even if the ESOP trustee is not actively involved in the company, as they usually aren't, those considerations or concerns do at some level flow through down to the level of the board and management. And I've had one company, at the very least, say to me that, we'd like to do things with our company that we feel uncomfortable doing under ERISA oversight. In their case, they wanted to scale the company down in size and focus in a kind of more sort of high-end service line area. They weren't sure that the ERISA trustee would be comfortable with them doing that. So, these are all just reasons that and for different companies might be different reasons why, ESOP companies have signaled their interest in the EOT. Of course, there's also the possibility of being another reason that companies have approached me. A fourth reason is being bought out by sort of a kind of like a hostile takeover situation where you have a third-party buyer coming in and aggressively negotiating to buy out the company and buy out the employee ownership. And the people at that company, whether it's the founder who's still with the company or some employee owner who was there at the time of the ESOP transition and worked their way up to being CEO, they're kind of like, hey, listen, we want to keep the employee ownership. We know, doesn't ESOP aspect of things is not the critical ingredient. There isn't the magic ingredient here. We like our employee ownership, and we don't want to be bought out by this third party. So there's a lot of interest there. And we do now have one successful example of a company that was a 40% ESOP, and they terminated the ESOP and they transferred majority ownership of the company to a perpetual purpose trust. And that segues to the third point. You might be on this call because you're just kind of a good person, and it's time to sell your company, and you want to do something good with your company because you're a good person. And when you say that to people, you talk to investment bankers or M&A advisors, and they kind of say, like, oh, well, you're a good person. This is what do something nice with your company. I guess that ESOP is what people do when they're in your shoes. And something that you might not have considered is that there are other alternatives. I'm personally a proponent of employee ownership, but listen, if you're a company owner who wants to do something good with your company, and you're on this call because somebody said something about ESOPs or employee ownership, but that's not exactly where your heart is, I'd still love to work with you. There's all kinds of things you can do with a perpetual purpose trust. And a perpetual purpose trust is the actual sort of legal entity type that underlies an employee ownership trust. What more specifically is it's a purpose trust or a non-charitable purpose trust that is operating in a state which has limited or eliminated altogether the rule against perpetuities, which used to prevent perpetual trusts in most states, or in all states really. So you have a perpetual purpose trust. You can create a trust to own your company and dedicate the profits or put controls on or limits on the operations of the company for any purpose under the sun, really. It's kind of like fill in the blank here. And with an EOT, you're just filling in that blank with employee ownership and benefiting the employees. But you could have environmental purposes. You could have social purposes. You could have the profits flow to charity. A lot of business owners consider putting their company under nonprofit ownership, and that's another group of owners that I've been speaking with recently. You have public charity, private foundation rules or get complicated, and I now have nonprofit foundation company owners speaking with me about the EOT as an alternative because nonprofits aren't entirely satisfactory as a vehicle to hold ownership of their company for some public benefit or some social benefit. So if you're just broadly interested in doing something good with your company, and maybe you include some employee benefits, maybe you don't, but employee ownership isn't exactly the thing that is most important to you in your heart, then I'd also love to speak with you because we can talk about doing a perpetual purpose trust for some other purpose or set of purposes. So U.S. examples, I mentioned that we now have a couple of companies that do use the EOT structure to hold ownership. I've probably been involved in about every EOT transaction that uses U.S. law to structure the EOT. This is Metis Construction. They're about 30 plus people construction company out in Seattle, Washington. They're very happy now with the EOT, and the company founder still works there. He's third from the right with the glasses, second row from the bottom, Matthias. Then you have Organically Grown Company, and they're about 200 employee organic produce distributor based also out in the Northwest. And they were 40%. They're the company that I mentioned earlier. They were 40% ESOP owned. They had been through all sorts of legal structures throughout their existence. I think they started out as a nonprofit and then moved to an agriculture co-op and then a farmers co-op and then moved from there to an S corp and then they moved to an ESOP and after all those transitions, they decided that what they really wanted, what best suited their goals, was a perpetual purpose trust. So they still have a lot in the way of employee benefits inside of their perpetual purpose trust, but fundamentally, the operations of their company and the financial benefits that flow from their company are directed towards not just in the benefit of employees, but also the environment, supporting their farmers, helping their keeping prices low for their customers, and giving benefits back to the community as well. NCEO did a feature on Metis Construction in early 2016, and there's some articles out there which I'd be happy to share in Forbes and Fast Company on the OGC transition, which happened pretty recently last year. So at this point, I've been talking about the EOT idea for a couple of years now, and there are a few questions that seem to invariably kind of come up in conversation with people or in presentations. I'd be happy to kind of turn this over to questions or Q&A right now. I do see that there are a bunch of questions here, so I can. What do you think, Bethany? Should I do the?
I'm thinking that maybe we can go to the questions that people have for time's sake, 'cause it's already, and then we can send this list of FAQ to everybody so they have those FAQs. It's really up to you.
Okay, yeah, let's go through now. Do I start at the top and go to the bottom, Bethany, or do I start at the
Yes.
bottom?
Let's start at the top. Yeah.
Top. Okay. Do employees get the value of share price appreciation in an EOT? Well, the short answer is no. Rather than reinvesting back into the company with every dollar like you do with an ESOP, which then pumps up the value of the share price, and then that increased value then going back to the employees upon their exit, they just get that cash. They just get that cash now in the form of a profit share. So the short answer is no. They get current benefits now through profit shares. That's how employees benefit financially. They don't directly, as opposed to taking that value later on through reinvestment and a corresponding increase in the value of the share. A more nuanced answer might also just sort of include the fact that you can't, and nothing about an EOT structure prevents you from Um, you can get as creative as you want. I mean, nothing about an EOT structure prevents you from doing kind of like phantom stock for um, just management level employees or even all of the employees. So you could layer onto the EOT some kind of a program that mimics the ESOP in terms of allocating, like for example, allocating phantom stock to employees and allowing them to realize the growth in the phantom stock in that way. So, I mean, so the short answer is no. The longer answer is you can get as creative as you want here. Um, are EOTs compatible with IPOs? So people always ask that question with ESOPs too, and uh, I think that the short answer there is that you have lots of publicly traded companies that have a 1% ESOP. Um, you know, that is employee stock ownership. It's not what we think of when we think of employee ownership. If employee ownership is sort of, at least 30% interest in the company, or maybe even some people might say a majority interest in the company by the employees. EOTs don't work super well in the minority shareholding context. It's possible to do a minority EOT, if the company is highly profitable and dividending out, and you did a 1% or a 10% EOT, and then you did an IP, founders kept another, X% of the shares, and then Y% of the shares are taken to the public market. You could do that if the company's dividending and then the employees are getting dividends through the EOT. But it's not a kind of the cleanest fit. If you're thinking about doing an IPO, you'd probably want to do a minority ESOP. But again, happy to walk you through the issues there. Will I get an email? Yes, Bethany, I think we'll be able to send out an email with the slides.
That's correct.
I'm not sure what that question means.
All right, how about it's 12:40. You want to pick maybe the two next questions, and then we can privately answer or send out an email with answers to the other questions.
Sure, and I see Sarah. I see Sarah is one of the askers here. You and I will have a call. We already have a call scheduled soon, so we'll get to the rest of your questions soon. I hope you don't mind that. We're an existing ESOP for over 10 years. Can we transfer or convert into an EOT? Definitely yes. So we've already had a company that was a 40% ESOP transfer over to a perpetual purpose trust with employee benefits. It's fundamentally the same kind of a transaction as you would use to get to an EOT. So yes, yes, yes. Please come speak with me. You probably want to involve some outside financing. Short answer there is that the cleanest way to do that is to get some outside financing, terminate the ESOP, buy back the shares from the employees within a 5-year time frame. So you can use some of the future cash flow from the company over the next 5 years to finish buying out the ESOP, but you'd want to terminate it, buy back all the shares within 5 years, or get cash to the employees within 5 years, I should say, and then do a transfer to the EOT. And then the last question is, would an EOT assist in recruiting skilled employees to a high-risk startup tech firm? I think that there's certainly, I think employee ownership is highly attractive to employees. In a startup tech firm, they might be more used to the idea of getting options. So just like any employee ownership company, you'd probably have some education to do, and some explanation to do about what the benefits of an EOT are, what the benefits of employee ownership are. But it's certainly something you could do, and I would add as well that you could use a combination of stock options, which is what folks in that sector understand, and an EOT in addition to that. Still have you'll see in the slide sort of like some of the more frequently asked questions, but you'll get those in an email from Bethany.
Wonderful. Maybe you can go through those a bit, yeah, and skip to some of the final slides. Yeah, we'll make sure. And Chris, you're okay sending out these slides to the
Yeah,
people?
of
Okay,
course.
great. Good, good. All right. Well, since we already went through our Q&A, all right. So that concludes today's webinar. Right now, our next webinar is TBD, but we will send out an announcement very soon. And as I mentioned earlier, a link to the recording of this presentation will be emailed to you shortly. For more information on the New Jersey New York Center for Employee Ownership, please visit our website, ownership.rutgers.edu. Thank you very much, Chris, for presenting, and thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.